Today, our path leads us to Austria, to the city of Salzburg. If you spend some time researching on the internet, you'll find that Salzburg is famous for a great deal of things. The birthplace of Mozart, the world-class Salzburg Festival, and the Baroque architecture that makes it one of the most beautiful and well-preserved Old World cities in Europe, just to name a few. The city is located in the north of Austria, at the foot of the Alps on the banks of the Salzach River, only 5 kilometers from the border with Germany. This is the 4th largest Austrian city with a population of about 145,000 people. It was founded 13 centuries ago. Salzburg has so much history and sights that you can spend hours talking about it and days exploring. We will limit ourselves to visiting the famous Salzburg Fortress and a walk through the center of the old city. At the top of the mountain Moosberg, above the roofs of the old town, stands the Hohensalzburg Fortress. You can get up to it using the funicular railway, which was built back in 1892. We opted to fully enjoy the old streets of the city and climb the fortress on foot. The name of the city comes from the 2 words, Salz from German salt and Berg, a fortress or a city. The ancient Celts discovered salt deposits here 4,000 years ago, and Salzburg owes its prosperity to that very same salt. Churches, fountains and squares, parks and castles, as well as the Hohensalzburg Fortress, which is a symbol of Salzburg, were all built with money from the salt trade. The founder of Salzburg is considered to be Saint Rupert, who had around 696 AD started construction of the monastery of St. Peter. Saint Rupert became the first archbishop of Salzburg and established the centuries-long rules of the church. In 714, Saint Rupert became the founder of Nonnberg Abbey. The role of abbess was assigned to his niece, Erentrude of Salzburg. Twice there was a fire at the abbey church, first in 1006 and rebuilt by 1009 with the support of Henry II, and then in 1423 with the recovery process taking place between 1464 and 1509. Since its founding, Nonnberg Abbey has never ceased to function, and as such, it is one of the oldest continuously operating nunneries in existence. Only noble women were permitted to enter the convent. Noble ladies who took a vow and entered the abbey had no way back. They no longer had the right to leave this place or this lifestyle. The monastery always had a great deal of land and certain wealth, accumulated by collecting donations of considerable size. For 5 centuries, they were exempt from the obligatory tax, which was imposed on everything in the city. They had various privileges and their own unique rules that were unlike those of other monasteries followed. Take, for example, the 15th century, when it was decided that monks and nuns were to live without luxury, no meat, no rich fabrics, no soft beds or other comforts. But the nuns of Naumburg had downy feather beds and beautiful, richly embroidered clothes. Instead of submitting to the edict, the nuns appealed to the Pope with a request not to change their way of life. And as a result, they still continue to eat meat 3 times a week to this day. Let this be a life lesson. Ladies, always fight for your rights. Let's continue our journey to the fortress, the largest and most preserved medieval fortress in Central Europe, as well as a symbol of Salzburg. Hohensalzburg attracts millions of tourists to the city every year. Hohensalzburg was built in 1077. At first, it was a castle in the Romanesque style, built on the summit of Fürstensberg by order of the Archbishop of Salzburg, Gebhard. Over time, the castle was rebuilt and strengthened, with powerful towers and bastions added, and it slowly became an impregnable fortress. In the 16th century, Hohensalzburg acquired its modern look. It was then that behind the walls of the fortification appeared cozy chambers with luxurious decorations and furnishings. The one and only time that the fortress was actually under siege was in 1525. The insurgent miners, peasants, and townspeople tried to overthrow Prince Matthias Lang, but could not penetrate the thick walls of the fortress during the 61 days that the siege lasted. However, during the Napoleonic Wars, Hohensalzburg was surrendered peacefully, without a fight. Hohensalzburg translates as the High Fortress of Salzburg. From the observation towers and fortress walls, there is a fascinating view of the city and the surrounding area that is worth the climb alone. Right at the foot of the Fürstensberg mountain is the oldest cemetery of Salzburg, the Cemetery of St. Peter. The history of the cemetery is not entirely known. It is supposed that it began in the 7th century, near St. Peter's Abbey. The first documented burials date back to the 12th century. Initially, even before the appearance of the monastery, commoners were buried in the cemetery. But after a couple centuries, local authorities decided that only those who accomplished something during their lifetimes would be allowed to find eternal peace near the monastery. Here, you can visit the grave of Mozart's wife, Maria Anna, or see the tombstones of the relatives of the great Haydn. Many tombstones and monuments look like real works of art. In 1878, local authorities closed the cemetery of St. Peter, but at the insistence of the monks of the abbey in 1930, it was once again permitted to conduct burials. Strange. It looks to me like all these resting places have been occupied long ago. Along with the chic buildings of the Baroque era and spacious squares found in Salzburg, you will notice that many of these narrow medieval streets have been preserved to keep hold of the city's historical spirit. The old Gertrude de Gassy Lane is kind of like Salzburg's calling card. Here, in 1756, in house number 9, the great Mozart was born. On this street, there are shops with as much variety as you can imagine, as well as restaurants and cafes rich with traditional Austrian dishes. It's as wonderful a place to explore as it is to actually shop. In Salzburg, every third job is directly or indirectly related to tourism. And the unemployment rate is the lowest in Austria at about 5%. Here we find a sculpture called the Cloak of Peace, one of several iterations of a sculpture by Anna Cromie called the Cloak of Conscience. While it's meant to symbolize beautiful things, I have to admit it's a bit unnerving to look at. Salzburg is a city of amazing churches. Especially famous is the Salzburg Cathedral. The architect Santino Solari, who is now resting in St. Peter's Cemetery, spent 14 years on this monumental creation of church architecture. He built it on the foundation of the Romanesque cathedral, from which only the baptismal font remains. And it is the very one in which Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart was baptized. And this is the Residenzplatz Square, located between two archbishop residencies in the heart of the old town. By the way, the old city is on the UNESCO World Heritage List. Salzburg is a unique city for tourists. It isn't necessary to rush from famous site to famous site in order to experience the history and atmosphere to the fullest. Here, you can simply walk past cozy cafes, throw pebbles into the river from pedestrian bridges, and just watch life happening around you. And that is enough to capture what this city has to teach you. Its cobbled, winding streets remember the sound of carts of past centuries, the singing of morning prayers trickling from the abbey, and the hushed whispers of lovers exchanging promises in doorways. Salzburg is a city that is an inspiration simply by existing. As much as there is to talk about here, there is nothing that can replace experiencing it yourself. Well, my friends, this is where our short journey through Salzburg is over, and we part ways until next time. Subscribe to my channel and join me for new adventures.